Ang refleksyon ng ating kilos at gawa ay resulta ng embedded values nating mga Pilipino. Kumbaga, ito ay nakapaloob na rin sa ating kultura na nagpapakita kung paano tayo mamuhay sa lipunan. Sa librong isinulat ni F. Landa Hocano, suriin natin kung ano ba ang definisyon ng values at paano ito nabuo sa dinami-daming pinagdaanan ng ating bansa sa ilalim ng kolonyalismo. Sa panahon ng kolonisasyon, maraming itinanim ang mga mananakop na paniniwala at pag-uugali na hanggang ngayon ay nakatatak sa isipan ng mga Pilipino. Kung kaya't maraming kritiko nagsasabi na ang Filipino traditional values ay hindi dapat ipinagmamalaki, bagkus ay dapat batikusin dahil sa masamang implikasyon nito sa ating kultura. The values that we see as important in our culture are replaced and described by critics, specifically foreigners, as scheming. As pointed out by Hocano, it is a sad reality how these seemingly positive traits can be overturned into negative ones. For instance, we see discipline as authoritarianism, kinship loyalties as nepotism, gift-giving as bribery, utang na loob as patronage, and hospitality as a sign of total submission to others. As a result, these views have succeeded in confusing us and in protruding incongruities in our perception of our society and culture instead of enlightening us about ourselves as Filipinos and helping us in broadening our appreciation of our traditional life ways. Moreover, these critics have succeeded in creating a mindset that defines our values as negative and our character as weak, thus undermining our confidence in our native abilities to excel. Before we analyze further the implication of our perceived values, let us first examine the context of how and why these values are established in Filipinos. Historically, the Philippines was colonized several times by the Spaniards, next are the Americans, and also invaded by the Japanese. Several changes took place during these encounters with exogenous cultures. Binago ng mga mananakop, lalo na ang mga Espanyol at Amerikano, ang pananampalataya, panlipunan at maging ang sistemang politikal nating mga Pilipino. Nagtatag sila ng mga batas para tayo kontrolin at siguraduhin ang kanilang pamamahala sa ating bansa. Habang ang dati nating values ay tinignan nila bilang luma o primitibo, ang ating mga gawi ay tinawag na barbaric, maging ang ating indigenous values ay inilarawan nilang paatras at tiwali. Sinabihan din tayong hindi sibilisado at ang mga paniniwala natin ay tinawag na pamahiin. Kung kaya't ito'y binago at pinalitan ng mas katanggap-tanggap na values and practices na ginawang new standards nating mga Pilipino. Ang resulta, ang mga pagbabago na ito ay ginawa nating pamantayan kung ano nga ba ang tama o mali, pangit o maganda, mabuti o masama sa ating lipunan. Kaya nga para kay Hocano, pamantayan ang mas angkop na Filipino term sa salitang values kaysa sa nakasanayang salita nitong kahalagahan. Since pamantayan means behaving in line or in conformity with what is acceptable by the group. Dagdag pa dito, values are our assumptions and beliefs that influence us to see things the way we do. There are 4 ways of looking at pamantayan. First, pamantayan is a code of meanings. Pamantayan embodies the internal code of meanings we used to know, to understand, to experience, and to describe the world around us. It consists of assumptions, postulates, and premises. Halimbawa, sinasabi natin na maganda ang isang bagay dahil ito ay mula sa accepted standards ng ating lipunan. Second is pamantayan as internal rules. This is the traditionally established principles and rules governing behavior. Ang mga panuntunan na ito ay naging daan sa mga tao na makipagkapwa ng maayos at maiwasan ang hindi pagkakaintindihan. Third is pamantayan as a directive force. Pamantayan becomes the basis for choosing goals, evaluating attitudes, and making decisions to sentiments and thoughts as this relate to behavior. Lastly, pamantayan as a system of relationships. We relate to people according to accepted standards of relationships unless we want to deviate from these standards and introduce change. It is for this reason that we must exert more effort to know our pamantayan system. We have to re-understand it. We have to define things in terms of local knowledge, beliefs, and practices. If not, we will be interpreting our values outside of their cultural context as we have done in the past. Sa paglipas ng panahon, nagsialisa na ang mga mananakop, ngunit bit-bit pa rin natin ang kolonyal na mentalidad sa pang-araw-araw nating pamumuhay. Kaya nga sabi ng iba, siguro may mali sa ating gawi at paniniwala. Mababa ang tingin natin sa ating sarili. Ngunit, para kay Hocano, mali na atin nang itong tanggapin. Bagkus, ito ay dapat nating questionin. Our values are not irrational, neither are negative. Ito ay nagmula lamang sa impluwensya ng mga dayuhan. Thus, it is valid to argue that there are no negative Filipino values. Mali lamang tayo ng paggamit ito. Halimbawa, kapag ang isang lalaki ay nahuli kasamang iba niyang kaibigan na nagdodroga, ang una niyang sasabihin ay napasama lang ako o nakisama lang ako. Sa kontekstong ito, ang pakikisama bilang isang Filipino value ay ginamit upang magpaliwanag kung bakit siya nakagawa ng masama. Sa ganitong sitwasyon, nalagay ito sa maling konteksto ng tunay na kahulugan ng pakikisama. Kung kaya't, we repeat na there are no negative Filipino values. There are only wrong uses of the values. Ang pag-question sa ating gawi at paniniwala ay hindi implikasyon na dapat natin itong tanggalin. Sa halip, para kay Hocano, kailangan na nating tignan sa ibang perspektibo ang ating traditional values nang sa gayon ay mas maintindihan natin ito. At paano natin magagawa iyon? We need to free our minds from the biases of the old colonial value models and to build new ones that reflect the best in us. We have to romance our culture. Nang sa gayon ay mas maintindihan natin ang tunay na kahulugan ng mga paniniwala miski pag-uugali nating mga Pilipino. Sa ganitong paraan, mas may uugat natin ang ating kultura sa sariling atin. We can generate a new sense of identity with, pride in, and commitment to our national goals. To fine-tune modern ideas to Filipino traditional culture or vice versa, we have to do two things. First, we go back to the basics of our value system itself. Going back to basics means relearning our traditional values and practices. Initial steps to regain our lost confidence in our cultural system is first, we must dispel or debunk the myth that the exogenous models are superior to our indigenous models. Hanggat mas nililinang natin ang kolonyal na pag-iisip, we will never be proud of ourselves as a Filipino. Second, free ourselves from the current exogenous blinders. Ang mapanlinlang na turo ng mga mananakop ay nagresulta lamang sa pagbaba ng ating pagpapahalaga sa ating kultura. Third, look at our traditional values in a more positive light. Sabi nga ni Hokano, habang pinapanatili natin sa ating kamalayan ang negatibong pananaw, lalong hihigpit ang yakap ng kahirapan sa ating buhay. Fourth, we should examine the functions of our value system in terms of the logic and moral authority of our tradition. Hindi dapat tayo nakaasa lamang sa turo ng mga dayuhan na sinira lamang ang ating kultura. Fifth, let us focus our academic and civic endeavors on discovering the inner strength of our culture instead of continuously looking for its weaknesses. Lastly, release our hidden potentials and our inner strength from the trap of historical neglect and apathy. Matuto tayong bigyan ng definisyon ang tama sa mali na hindi nakaangkla sa impluwensya ng mga dayuhan. Second is to emphasize our social-cultural similarities rather than our ethnic differences. While it is true that there are differences in our ethnic lifeways, underneath this apparent diversity are structural and cultural similarities. Halimbawa, ang mga Pilipino ay kilala sa pagkakaroon ng tight kinship at pagiging family-oriented. We do not agree to kanya-kanya. Instead, we emphasize groupism as seen in the importance we attach to kinship and barkada relationships. Moreover, we are highly sensitive to people. We reason more with our hearts than with our minds. Ika nga, Filipino objectivity is 90% subjectivity. Kung kaya't binibigyan natin ng halaga ang ating mga relasyon sa ating kapamilya, kaibigan, maging sa ating kapitbahay. Mas maingat tayo na hindi makasakit ang damdamin ng iba. Dito, mas nabibigyan din natin ang importansya ng pakikisama, hiya at utang na loob, unlike the Americans na madaling makaget over. At kung mas pinaglalaanan natin ng pansin ang ating pagkakapare-pareho kaysa sa ating pagkakaiba-iba, we can help create an ideal environment conducive to the development of our national consciousness and unity.
Dumako naman tayo sa iba't ibang elemento ng pamantayan. May tatlong core na elements ang pamantayan. Unang-una rito ang halaga. As the evaluative core of the Filipino value system, halaga helps us identify which ideas, events, sentiments, or experiences are significant and which are not. Halaga is the matrix through which phenomena observed or events experienced are identified or evaluated based on our immediate sense data and given specific importance, worth, or kahalagahan. This means that we often see, define, feel, and smell the objects, ideas, events, and actions according to commonly shared ethical and moral standards. The halaga we give to an act as desirable or preferable depends on our conscious assessment of its worth or importance. It also serves as a motive force for us as our confidence, creativity, and knowledge broaden so what we are doing is something we value. The following processes are involved in identifying and affirming the halaga we extend to objects, ideas, events, and actions. First is the thing, where an external or internal stimulus makes an impact on us at the initial encounter. Second is when we recover from the impact and we intuitively identify and visually cognize objects, ideas, or actions. Third is pagtatasa, where we proceed to assess the nature of objects, ideas, or actions. Fourth is pagpapahalaga, where we assign the objects, ideas, and actions the halaga they warrant. Fifth is pagtatanggap, where we evaluate if the halaga suits our needs and desires, and then we accept it as relevant or meritorious. Lastly, the new halaga is fed back to the existing pamantayan to be used as the new standard or more valid one to use in evaluating the relevance, merit, or importance of a certain stimulus when it reappears in the future. Bilang culture-bound ang halaga, normal lamang magkaroon tayo ng halaga norms na pagpapahalaga sa mga objects, ideas, at events na shared sa ating community or country. Karamihan sa ating halaga norms ay sumasalamin sa ating pagkasensitibo bilang mga tao. Isang halimbawa ay ang paggamit natin sa mukha at sa balat bilang simbolo ng ating fragile nature. Sa mga okasyong maaari tayo mabahira ng social dirt, nasa nature natin ang pag-save face at magbalat kayo dahil gusto nating protektahan ang imahe natin from any form of impurities. Ngunit importanteng tandaan na hindi ito nangangahulugang tayong mga Pilipino ay madaling ma-offend o snowflake ayon sa iba. Ang ating pagkasensitibo ay nagmula sa ating pagpapahalaga sa nararamdaman ng ating kapwa at sa ating mga sarili dahil may pag-unawa tayo na lahat tayo ay mayroong self-worth. Kaakibat nito ang pag-uphold ng reputasyong respectable at walang bahid ng social dirt. Dito rin nanggagaling ang ating pagkamahiyain na tinatawag ng mga dayuhang manunulat bilang concealed dishonesty. Ngunit ang katotohanan nito ay nakaugalian nating mag-withhold sa pagsabi o paggawa ng kahit anong maaaring makadulot ng sama ng loob sa ating kapwa. Sunod ay ang asal. Asal is the expressive core of the Filipino value system and refers to the commonly shared values and norms that Filipinos use in expressing themselves and in observing interpersonal and intergroup interactions. We are judged, accepted, or rejected by other members of the community according to our asal. When we exhibit kagandahang asal, we establish meaningful relationships with our kapwa by understanding how to read meanings and actions and what others expect from us during interactions. Ang salita at gawa ng isang taong may magandang asal ay hindi nakapipinsala sa kapwa, hindi nakakasakit ng damdamin, at hindi nakadudungis ng karangalan. Sinasalamin ng ating basihan sa magandang asal ang pagpapahalaga natin sa nararamdaman ng ating kapwa at ang sensitive nature natin as a people na matatandaan natin mula sa ating pagtatalakay ng halaga. On the other hand, persons who are devoid of mabuting asal are not only deemed as walang asal, but are also viewed to have descended to a being lower than humans, hence the saying asal-aso and hayop ka. Knowing how much regard we have for mabuting asal, why is graft and corruption heavily rampant in our government and our justice system? Several writers contend that graft and corruption is part of our culture, but Hokano emphasizes that these notions are wrong. Graft and corruption are not generated by our values and are not included in the commonly shared Filipino asal. Rather, it is a problem of management and leadership and public office administration, not of values and culture. One of asal's major components is kapwa, which means of equal status. When prefixed to another, it suggests togetherness. Several examples include kapwa-tao, kapwa-estudyante, and kapwa-manggagawa. There may be the existence of hierarchical positions occupied by managers and supervisors in institutions like bureaucracies. These positions are recognized by workers, but they view each other still as persons who are equal. This is for us to acknowledge everyone as equals regardless of their differences in social and economic status. Kapwa gives credence to Hofstede's observations that we are a country that values collectivism and as such is against the culture of kanya-kanya. We are far from becoming an individualistic society, as this is derived from the Western-influenced formal education that has trained us to become individualists by teaching us independence and self-reliance. This independence translates in the workplace as the mind-your-own-business attitude. However, in the Philippine context, problems in the workplace are best approached with good personal relations, which we excel at because we value our kapwa through pakikisama. The value we place in kapwa also manifests through familism and strong kinship ties. However, nepotism is considered as a violation of vassal-based behavior. We are a country that heavily values our family ties and disdain any dishonor to the family. One informant of Hokano study contends that those who practice nepotism do not love their families. For how can you love your family when you bring dishonor to them? Asal is intrinsic in our personality and is part of our identity as Filipinos. It serves as the standard by which we express our pagkatao, pakikipagkapwa-tao, pagkamakatao, and essentially our pagka-Filipino. Third is Diwa. Diwa, as the spiritual core of the Filipino value system, serves as the inner core of our being, from which emanate all our basic physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual drives. All phenomena associated with Diwa takes place inside the body or loob, which explains why we use loob as the point of reference in describing our physical, mental, and emotional conditions. When we feel good, we say, magaan ang loob. Our sense of gratitude is referred to as utang na loob. Willpower is lakas ng loob, and benevolence to us is kabutihang loob. Ano naman ang labas? Ang labas ay ang outer behavioral manifestation ng inner realities natin. This means our feelings, ideas, values, and norms are manifesting into our institutions, family, peers, and community. Mahalaga sa atin ang mga simbolismong ito, kaya nga sa konsepto ng pamilya ay mayroon tayong pamilya sa loob at pamilya sa labas. Importante ang distinctions na ito sa pag-carry out natin ng obligations and duties natin sa ating pamilya dahil kadalasan, mas obligado tayong pagsilbihan ang pamilya at kamag-anak natin kaysa sa mga taga-labas o mga hindi taga-rito. Napapaloob ang bahala na sa konsepto ng diwa. Mayroong negatibong konotasyon na nakapalibot sa bahala na dahil ayon sa mga dayuhang manunulat, ito ay avoidance of responsibility and leaving all responsibility to the supernatural. Ngunit maaari itong tignan bilang inner strength to take a risk and accept challenges, to initiate and move. Sinasabi natin ang bahala na upang palakasin ang loob na magpatuloy kahit na ang kinalabasan ng ating desisyon ay hindi tiyak. Sa pagsabi natin ito, nagkakaroon tayo ng pambihirang tapang na harapin ang sitwasyon. Nagsisilbi ito bilang code na nagbibigay sa atin ng access sa ating diwa at bisa na kung maaalala natin sa talakayan tungkol sa mythic phase ng Filipino prehistory ay ang isa sa mga dahilan kung paano nag-prevail ang Filipino culture malipas ang ilang daang siglo ng kolonyalismo.
Traditional values have contributed a lot in forming our identities as Filipinos. Other people often describe us as hospitable, family-oriented, marunong tumanaw ng utang na loob at madiskarte. But these positive values have created negative connotations as well. As pointed out earlier in the discussion, because of the influence of our colonizers who imposed religious, social, and political systems on Filipinos, Western standards become the acceptable standards of what is desirable, reasonable, and proper in society. They made us doubt our very own means of morality and convince us that our customs are primitive, backward, and corrupt. Napaniwala tayo na ang ating traditional values ay hadlang tungo sa modernisasyon. Ngunit ako ay sang-ayon sa statement ni Hokano na there are no negative Filipino values. There are only wrong uses of the values because our models are westernized. Ang pagkakaroon natin ng kolonyal na mentalidad ang naglilimita sa atin na linangin ang sarili nating values o paniniwala. Halimbawa nito ay ang pagiging konserbatibo. Dahil sa itinuro sa atin ng mga Espanyol, nagkaroon tayo ng new set of standards ng tama sa mali. Miski ang ating kasuotan ay naapektuhan. Kung tutuusin, ang kanilang turo pa nga ang naging sagaba sa pag-unlad ng ating mga pag-iisip. For instance, ang konsepto ng virginity at sex ay hindi problema noong pre-colonial times. Ngunit dahil sa turo ng mga praile, naging sarado ang ating pag-iisip tungkol dito. Moreover, because of the introduction of religion, Filipinos always say ipasa Diyos na lamang natin ito, or usual line of bahala na when things go predetermined and therefore inevitable. Kahit masama nang nangyayari sa atin, we treat this as our destiny and we see this as a trial to test our faith to God. Isa pa sa Filipino values ay ang Filipino resiliency. Because of our hardships under Western colonialism, we were molded to be resilient pero minsan we tend to forget kung hanggang saan ba ang pagtitiis. Kung kaya't para kay Ilocano, the only way to resolve this internal conflict is to romanticize our own culture. By romanticizing our culture, it means that we have to change negative aspects of our values and dwell deeper into their very essence. Nang sa gayon, we will be able to go on a journey towards self-actualization and a path towards discovering a well-defined and strong national identity. Kasi kung ang ating values ay laging nakaangkla sa impluwensya ng mga dayuhan, we will never prosper and know our identity as Filipinos. If we don't know how to define ourselves, then we risk ourselves of being defined by others. Ang mga Pilipino pa naman ay madaling makibagay sa kultura ng ibang bansa, lalo na ngayon sa panahon ng globalisasyon. Let us move forward to modernization without losing the moral authority of our Filipino cultural traditions. In terms of culture, hindi na ipagkakaila na maraming mabuting naiaambag ang mga dayuhan sa pag-unlad ng bansa natin. Sabi nga ni Nick Joaquin, hindi natin pwedeng alisin ng buo ang impluwensya ng kanluranin dahil parte na rin ito ng ating identidad bilang mga Pilipino. Ngunit para kay Ilocano, while it is true that we can't really disregard other scholars' interpretation of Filipino values, we can suggest new ways of looking at our traditional values, of re-understanding them, so that we can align these values into our own. Hindi naman natin sinasabi na superior ang ating kultura, kaya't dapat ito lang ating bigyang pansin. Pero bago dapat natin tingnan ang impluwensya ng ibang bansa, kilalanin at intindihin muna natin ang sariling atin. Kung kaya't mahalagang maging maingat ang mga manunulat sa kanilang mga sinasabi dahil malaki ang responsibilidad nito sa pagkatuto ng mga mamabasa.